New Wave Community Media.
It's just J-Mike.
Hello, my darlings. Welcome to another episode of Generation Mix Podcast, a.k.a. G to the M to the P. Where's Jolie? That's me. Yee. Anyway, so today we're doing another what I like to start calling now the reading hour. You know those audio books where you just sit there and say, okay, page number 68. Tristan looked at Joel and said, I shall slap you. I'm gonna start calling them that, but that basically will be like a catchphrase for another Wikipedia historical article of a public figure. And what's really amazing is that this person I'm going to talk about today, her name's Donyale Luna, who's cited as the world's first Black supermodel, and this was back in the 1960s. She actually, reading her stuff, she can be a part of our mixed race history. Now, what I was talking about to one of my producers earlier is how with mixed race, sometimes you don't always have information or want to just include information of first-gen biracial people like myself. And it's like, what about those whose grandparents were mixed or whose parents were mixed? I mean, they're basically still part of the mixed race community. And I think she falls under this because her mother was mixed race. So that's why I'm going to start expanding and seeing what more people that can be added to the community, and that in the end, we're going to see how diverse all of us really are, that really very few of us are actually not mixed race in some way. So here we go, y'all. Actually born Peggy Ann Freeman. She was known professionally as Donyale Luna. She was an African-American model and actress who gained popularity in Western Europe in the late 1960s. Generally cited as the first Black supermodel, Luna was the first African-American model to appear on the cover of the British edition of Vogue in March 1966. Luna made several underground films with Andy Warhol beginning in 1965, and following the experimental film êtes-vous, Maggoo. So that's Where Are You, Maggoo. It's French, but, translated into English. I do remember some French from high school. That was in 1966. And then in 1968, she appeared in Otto Preminger's Skidoo and Federico Fellini's Satyricon in 1969. So what's really interesting about this, really quick, another side note, is that this already reminds me of people like Josephine Baker and Tina Turner, and we know Josephine Baker was mixed, and how they tended to be more popular in Europe than they were here. And in a lot of ways, Europe was a lot more forward-thinking, more progressive-thinking in terms of race. It wasn't such a huge deal as it is in America. And I learned actually in France, they don't really care about that, like what color your skin is. It's like, well, where's your origin? Like what country you came from? Not so much, oh, what's the color of your skin? And that'll dictate things. Like it's more free in Paris like that, which is why someone like Josephine Baker was so popular in Paris. But I'll talk about her in another episode. So let's jump back into Donyale Luna, y'all. So she was born in Detroit, Michigan, to working-class parents Nathaniel Freeman and Peggy Freeman. Her mom's name was Herzog, her maiden name, in 1945. She was one of three daughters, Lillian, Peggy, Ann, and Josephine. Her father had moved to Detroit from Georgia as part of the Great Migration. Her father, of African-American heritage, worked in production at the Ford plant, and her mother, of African-American and German heritage, worked as a secretary for the Young Women's Christian Association and had been given the nickname Big Peggy to differentiate her from Peggy Ann, who was Little Peggy. Luna's parents married and divorced on 4 separate occasions due to their headstrong characters and Nathaniel's relatives' alcoholism. Luna and her sisters had a financially stable upbringing in a middle-class neighborhood of Detroit on Scotton Avenue. As a child, her father frequently took her on trips to local cinemas and, in summer, to swim at the Kronk Gym in Detroit. She attended the Detroit High School of Commerce, where she studied data processing, and Cass Technical High School, where she studied journalism, performing arts, and languages, and was in the school choir. Outside of school, she participated in local community theater and the experimental Concept East Theater. It was during this time, at age 18, that she began calling herself Donyale George Luna. This was thought to have been her way of dealing with a turbulent home life when her mother began raising the family as a single parent. She was also said to have spoken with an accent on Donyale, which she spoke not with a broad A or a French R, but an accent she invented. Her mother said its tone was like she was singing. The name Luna has been speculated to be chosen for its symbolic dimensions, reflecting her yearning for complete far-flung autonomy, being what Donyale described as the real surname of her father, or a reference to the space race. At this time, she wanted to pursue a career in acting. Luna's sister later described her as being a very weird child, even from birth, living in a wonderland, a dream. She routinely created fantasies about her background or origins and herself. She was known then as an aspiring actress. As an early boyfriend, Sanders Bryant III recalled first meeting her writing a play at lunchtime. She took roles such as Cherry in Paint Your Wagon, Ariel in The Tempest, Chastity in Anything Goes, and Jean in Stage Door. After rehearsals, inspired by the Beatniks, she visited coffee houses near the Wayne State University campus with her boyfriend, dressed in head to toe in black. On weekends, she often crossed the bridge to the neighboring Windsor, Ontario, or traveled to other nearby parts of Canada. She became known to a Roland Charette, the managing director of the Detroit Civic Center Theater, as a kook because she had a habit of walking around barefoot, even down the street. During the 1963 run of Paint Your Wagon, she fed popcorn to pigeons when they rehearsed outdoors. Contrasting her time in Detroit with her time in Europe modeling, she later noted, "Back in Detroit, I wasn't considered beautiful or anything." A fellow student at Cass Technical, Verna Green, noted, "She was such a striking image. I couldn't forget her. She looked like an oddball to the run-of-the-mill student. Not enough people had told her how strikingly beautiful she was. She was not a fashion-conscious student, her attire mostly consisting of simple black skirts and long, loose sleeve tops. She stated that in her time in Cass Technical, she wasn't accepted because I talked funny, I looked funny, and I was a weirdo to everyone. I grew up realizing I was strange." In October 1964, she moved to New York to pursue acting and modeling and found work as a junior secretary at an electronic cabling firm on Barrack Street. After joining an actors union, she moved into an apartment on Broadway, sharing the space with a roommate. Her sister Lillian later recalled she packed so little it seemed like she was going on an overnight trip rather than to live in New York. In January 1965, her mother fatally shot her father in self-defense as he was reportedly abusive, coming to Luna's childhood home drunk and threatening her mother just steps away from the family home. Lillian witnessed the incident, acknowledging the shooting to be accidental. Luna received the news 3 months after the fact and stayed in New York, which is said by psychologists to be a common coping mechanism for familial loss and trauma. In 1966, she reported to a journalist, "My mother is worried about me. She doesn't know that I have already been hurt." For the next 5 years, Luna divided her time between Europe and North America. She professed during the filming of Salome in 1971 that she wished to quit modeling and focus on acting, having been heavily influenced by surrealism and New Age, though by this time, however, she continued to accept modeling work in the 1970s. By 1972, she had moved to Rome. She was working for Danish photographer Gunnar Larsson, modeling for the couturier Ted Lapidus, alongside Verushka and Jean Shrimpton on the streets of Paris, earning $1,000 for the day, which in 2020 equivalent daily would be $6,250 a day. So, Detroit and New York, we start there with the modeling career. In 1963, near Detroit's Fisher Building, Luna met English photographer David McCabe. McCabe suggested she move to New York City to pursue modeling. Her mother initially discouraged this plan, suggesting that she become a nurse instead. Luna persisted, and her mother facilitated her moving in with an aunt near the New York Harbor in New Jersey, probably like Weehawken or something like that. That's like right across the way. In October 1964, Luna contacted McCabe, and he sent out her photographs to various agencies. McCabe introduced her to Harper's Bazaar editor Nancy White, fashion photographer Richard Avedon, and senior fashion editor China Machado. White signed her to an exclusive contract for the remainder of 1964, while Avedon served as her manager. Her first job as a model was a shoot for Mademoiselle, starring Woody Allen. In November 1964, Luna moved out of her aunt's apartment and into an apartment on Broadway in New York City, sharing the space with a roommate. In 1964, working as a model for Paco Rabanne, Luna witnessed American journalists spitting in the face of Rabanne because his fashion show used only Black models. Nancy White had Luna's likeness sketched into an illustration for the January 1965 cover of Harper's Bazaar, replacing a pre-planned cover, the first Black person ever put on the cover of Harper's Bazaar in its then 98 years of publication. However, Luna was portrayed as ethnically ambiguous. The sketch was her first work for Harper's Bazaar and included 6 other illustrations in the January 1965 issue. Denzinger described drawing a total of 40 brush and ink studies for that session in a one-room studio apartment on Lexington Avenue. I remember that the Bazaar editors came to the apartment with the clothes and that uniformed cops watched while Donyale modeled and I drew her. In the April 1965 edition, she was again photographed by Avedon in the What's Happening editorial, along with Paul McCartney, Gene Shrimpton, and Ringo Starr. The piece included a description of her as showing the tall strength and pride of movement of a Maasai warrior. This description was picked up in an article by the Sarasota Herald-Tribune. Finding the language in comparison deeply prejudiced and racialized, Herald-Tribune writers explored and wrote of work prospects of African-American women. In the same month, Luna received news of her father's death, but decided against returning to Detroit home for his funeral. Around this time, Luna also began having problems with Avedon. In an interview with an Italian magazine in 1975, she recalled that the more successful she became, the more controlling and possessive her fashion photographer manager became. Luna's career began to slow down when she met with the color bar of print publishing at the time. Southern U.S. advertisers have reported complaints against the inclusion of Luna's images in Harper's Bazaar, pulling their advertising revenue with readers canceling subscriptions. Designers Maine Bocher and Norman Norell refused to dress Luna in their clothes, and Harper's Bazaar owner Hearst Communications had stopped Avedon working with Luna after her contract expired. Richard Avedon believed that he was no longer allowed to work with Luna due to racial prejudice and the economics of the fashion business. McCabe later stated he believed that the magazine world really wasn't ready for photographing beautiful Black women. Black models were shown only through a racial script that brought together both primitivism and modernity. I guess it's modernity, don't know, but that's the best I can do, as the material precondition for participation within the industry, and an exotic Nobel Sauvage role, which required Black models to present only as outsiders from primitive African cultures. So basically, you're trying to have, if you're going to have a Black model in some sort of fashion spread, she's supposed to look like with like a spear and like some Fred Flintstone, Tarzan stuff. I think that's what it sounds like, and that's crazy. Bridget Keenan wrote that Luna, until then, any Black person who appeared in a fashion picture was usually there because they had been popped into the background as a kind of prop, such as Banny Yelverton, who was in 1958 placed on the far right of the fold-out so she can easily be torn out of the magazine by offended readers. Keenan further wrote how the othering exotic Black model trope perpetuated by white media creators that Luna's breakthrough into the glossy magazines meant that from then on, a black model might actually have some sort of career in front of her. Yet, extraordinary as she was, Miss Luna did not have a style that other women could adopt. She looked more like she was going to attack you, wrote one black girl. White fashion editors used her and immediate successors for impact as freakish clothes horses on which they could photograph their outrageous garments. Her acceptance, no doubt, boosted the morale of the black community, but she could not give them a look of their own. Following the death of her father and short-lived marriage of 10 months in New York, Luna had a nervous breakdown and spent time recovering in hospital at the end of 1965. 2 years later, she told the New York Times that she fled New York for Europe at the end of 1965, where she found they said beautiful things on one side and turned around and stabbed you in the back. She would later remember of the move to Europe. I wouldn't have to be bothered with political situations when I woke up in the morning. I could live and be treated as I felt without having to worry about the police coming along. Avedon, who had moved over to the American Vogue in 1966, requested Luna again for a shoot around northern Japan featuring furs, telling Dune Arbus that he had requested her specifically because of his association with her as an extenuated black girl, given there was no way of not being reminded of Egypt and not being reminded of Watusis and Africans, deftly conflating African culture and employing the prescribed pivotal racial script of the exotic black model which Luna had been portrayed in her shoots with him in Harper's Bazaar, which compared Luna to an animal as she was dressed in animal print. Diana Vreeland, along with Alexei Brodovich, prevented Avedon from using Luna as the only model in the shoot and suggested Veruska instead for the 27-page Great Fur Caravan shoot published in October 1966. And then we have ABC Jean Shrimpton. So this is the next little section. Ironically, in 1966, American Vogue named Donyale Luna the Model of the Year. Living in London, she was described in Jet magazine as the most photographed girl of 1966, challenging Jean Shrimpton for position and bankroll as the model most in demand in Europe's haute couture houses. By 1966, Luna had become an internationally recognized model, and in November 1966, Luna appeared in Cosmopolitan. In April 1967, Donyale also frequented Trude Heller's discotheque in Greenwich Village and covered a number of albums for Blue Note Records such as Lush Life, Mustang, A New Conception, Let 'Em Roll, and Easy Walker. Luna appeared in American Vogue in August 1969 and in 1970 as an advertisement for a colored contacts company, which she often wore. It was reported she changes her eyes to match her moods as she flits through Rome's posh parties while picture-making for Carlo Ponte. Well, all righty then. Then it says move to London. So Luna had arrived in London in December 1965. London is where she made her name as a model, emerging in swinging London as a growing youth cultural revolution was drawing international attention. Elements included Beatlemania and Mary Quant's miniskirts, with other models of color, including Kelly Wilson and Hazel Collins, wearing the stylized bobs of Vidal Sassoon, mods, teddy boys, and bright colors and patterns and fashions such as those sold in shops, including Barbara Holonicki's Biba, were seen in the street culture of Carnaby Street or Chelsea. Those are like really ritzy places, it's like the equivalent of Fashion Avenue back home. She was, or Madison Avenue too. She was photographed in London by David Bailey, William Klein, Helmut Newton, Charlotte March, and William Clotton, actually. Keen to join the London art scene, she became friends with Mick Jagger, Julie Christie, Michael Caine, Ian Quarrier, and Yul Brynner. She rented an apartment near the Thames River and bought a pet Maltese dog she named Christy Ann. In March 1966, about 3 months after having arrived in London, she appeared on the cover of British Vogue, becoming the first African-American model to appear on the cover of any Vogue magazine. Her image captured by photographer David Bailey, who described her as extraordinarily looking, so tall and skinny. She's actually 6'2", just so y'all know, so that's hella tall for a woman. She was like an illustration, a walking illustration. Shooting her for the cover, Bailey noted, I didn't care what she was. She could have been a fucking Martian for all I cared. He thought the editorial staff at Vogue House were pleased with their selection of a black cover model, but observed that the salespeople always had a problem with using her. She was chosen by Beatrix Miller, then the editor of British Vogue, for her bite and personality. Miller described Luna as happening to be in marvelous shape, all sort of angular and immensely strange and tall. The shot composition was inspired by Spanish surrealist Picasso's ocular-centric portraiture, with one of Luna's eyes pierced suggestively from between her fingers. So that's kind of like if you're doing an OK, and the O, like with your finger and thumb in a circle, is like covering your eye. It's like that. She was wearing a Chloe dress and Mimi d'En earrings for the shoot. In the editorial images, she was dressed in Christian Dior, silk tunics, mod-style dresses by Pierre Cardin, and a silver Yves Saint Laurent dress. In popular internet lore, such as on blogs, it has been speculated that the shot was angled so that Luna's face, most notably her lips and nose, are obscured on her British Vogue cover, also somewhat hiding her race, a proponent of featureism coded in privilege and Eurocentric beauty standards. However, in 2019, her family revealed that the shot was chosen as a single heavily lined eye, visible through her fingers, which form a V for Vogue. In March 1966, she appeared in a jewelry spread in the German magazine Twen, photographed by Charlotte March. Fellow model and friend Pat Cleveland noted, "She had no tits, but lots of presence. We'd walk down the street and men's mouths would drop open in awe. When we walked into restaurants, people would stop eating, stand up, and applaud. She was like a mirage of some kind of fantasy." Luna also went to work for French Vogue. Beth Ann Hardison stated of Luna that no one looked like her. She was like a really extraordinary species. Time magazine, in an article titled The Luna Year, 1966, described her as a new heavenly body who, because of her striking singularity, promises to remain on high for many a season. Donyale Luna, as she calls herself, is an unquestionably the hottest model in Europe at the moment. She is only 20, a Negro, hails from Detroit, and is not to be missed if one reads Harper's Bazaar, Paris Match, Britain's Queen, the British, French, or American editions of Vogue. She also appeared in London Life, a monthly fashion magazine, in a shoot as a shop window display model at a Wallace department store in London. In April, she appeared again in Vogue, UK, shot by David Bailey in a feature called This Summer's Dancing Patterns and Mod-Style Luxury Brands. She then appeared on the cover of Harper's Bazaar UK in June of 1966. Her features and skin color had not been obscured in this cover shot by Bill King. In the October 15th edition of British Vogue, she was featured in a Klein shoot with Audrey Hepburn. In 1967, the world's leading fiberglass mannequin designer Adele Roostein released a model based on Luna's statuesque figure. The previous figure had been the popular model Twiggy. Jet described the Luna-inspired mannequins as unmistakably Negro, excellently sculpted and poised, and dressed in the London mod styles, and reported that Adele Roostein had paid Luna to pose for the walk at $105 per hour. Equivalent today is $830 per hour. She was also noted to be working in New York for a short period in September 1967, but her flatmates thought they were all going to get kicked out soon because Donyale was making about $500 worth of calls to Europe every month. Another mannequin model was made by Lester Gaba, who made both a black and white version. She was also shot in Rabanne by Peter Knapp for the Sunday Times. On the March 27, 1968, she appeared on the cover of British magazine Queen in a head wrap. In November 1968, Luna and a party of five, including Ian Quarrier and Mia Farrow, went for breakfast at the Mayfair Cavendish Hotel, Jermyn Street, to St. James in London, and at 4 a.m. were asked to leave with the men who were not wearing ties, being informed they were not properly dressed. When Quarrier noted that other seated men were not wearing ties, Luna asked the managers if it was because she was colored. Eventually, all five were denied service in the hotel restaurant, and were removed by police for causing a disturbance. In her usual extravagance, Luna arrived in a maroon-colored Rolls Royce, wearing a yellow coat of Mongolian lamb's wool and knee-high blue suede boots, where Luna accused the police of lying, but her claims went unheard. Poirier defended Luna in the London Bow Street court, noting when the judge Kenneth Harrington said, "I'm quite sure it had nothing to do whatsoever with Miss Luna's color." Poirier shouted from the dock in the courtroom, "That is not true." Poirier would eventually be charged £10 for disturbing the peace. Luna later summarized the event for the American press, saying that rowdiness had occurred and that her party was asked to leave because I am colored. It was a nightmare. The hotel staff and police were pushing me around. The hotel refused to tell us why we were being thrown out. In the same month, she was shot for British Vogue again by Harry Peccanati, it looks like, an Italian guy. Okay. In 1969, she was again being paid $1,000 a week. 2020 equivalent, $7,000 a week. Luna was initially supposed to cover Vogue Paris before British Vogue when she arrived in Europe in December 1965. Edmund Charles Roux, who had fostered the talent of William Klein, had shot Luna for the cover, but prior to release, the cover was changed overnight to that of two white models in an effort to avoid offending readers for its capacity to shock because Luna was a woman of color. She was put forward for the cover by the French editor Charles Roux, who was subsequently fired on the charge of C. Newhouse for attempting to put a black model on the cover, a feat which would take another 22 years when Naomi Campbell was put on the cover, but even then only on the grounds that YSL would otherwise withdraw advertising revenue. I tell you, institutional racism. By 1966 of her modeling, she was quoted as saying, "Being what I am, I can get what I ask." Paco Rabanne had her as hair model in his debut Paris show entitled 12 Unwearable Dresses, designed for dancing in, which fellow London-based model Kelly Wilson also appeared. Working in the spring of 1966, she was modeling for Paris Match, who had 11 different photographers doing shoots for the magazine, including landing gear of an airborne helicopter and underwater with her robe streaming behind her. She was shot for Guy Laroche for Match on a skating rink and by Charles Courier and Emmanuel Ungaro for the spring-summer collection. She appeared on the cover of Elle for July 1966 shoot by Ronald Traeger in a long toga dress by Galeries Lafayette and in a beach shoot with Jill Pennington. This sister was hella busy. Man, here we go. Now we're talking to Sydney. Now, really short thing of her modeling stint in Sydney. This is Australia, y'all. In 1967 in Sydney, she modeled several paper dresses for the store Paraphernalia, paper dresses having been a fad popular with teenage girls. She appeared on a catwalk in Sydney for the Donyale Luna Spectacular fashion show. Now we gonna pop to Italy, y'all. Here comes Italy. Luna appeared in the Italian magazine Amica and a number of animal print and fur coats in 1966, and Vogue Italia shot by Gianpaolo Barbieri. She modeled later in a number of camera advertisements in 1968. She bought an apartment in Italy in 1970 and drove around in her Cinquanta car and folded herself into like an accordion, squeezing her knees up to her chin to get to new modeling shoots. In January 1970, she appeared in the Italian adult magazine Playmen in a number of fishnet-style outfits and a multiple-page spread. And this time, she was reportedly thrown out by Italian police for not having the correct paperwork to reside in Italy, but her husband recalled later that she was harassed for her skin color and road. When Luna moved to Italy in 1974, she was a collaborator with her husband in photographic shoots and other media such as a hand-illustrated fairy tale, avant-garde film scripts, and beautiful colored prints, which remained unpublished. She was said to be the most creative as a content creator of art in this period of her life. However, historians have also noted she is said to have felt a deep sense of existential aloofness in this period. In a short prose piece entitled Luna Fly Laby, she wrote a self-aware part confessional work which alludes to an insular and at times stifling childhood the excitement and challenges Luna experienced in the fashion world and her move to Europe, and how, as a biracial woman, these societal forces conspired to render Black women invisible versus her visible life, which is heavily present throughout her work in the motifs of visions, her spiritual visions of other Black women in history, in her writings, as she refers to as future visioning, and succumbing to visual mistakes, her desire to achieve her own form of beauty, which she considered her art, such as modeling, photographs, or films, due to her conflicting position as a biracial woman in her environment in her career. She also modeled for artist Peter Beard in 1977. Here, the next little short section says return to North America. So she would return for a year between 1973 and April 1974, with her work later published, and returning again between October 1974 and June 1975 to the U.S. to do runway modeling in New York and California and Toronto. She appeared on the cover of Warhol's magazine Interview for October 1974. Luna then appeared in a nude photo layout in April 1975 issue of Playboy, the photographer being her husband, Luigi Casagnaglia. In the shoot, she depicts herself as characters of her own devising, as an angel soaring over the Los Angeles skyline, or as a mermaid perched on a rock by the Pacific Ocean. Powell notes, although fulfilling Playboy's prerequisite for female nudity, the photographs were far from titillating or sexually explicit. Luna seemed not only at ease with her nudity, but completely beyond societal structures and moral rectitude. She was also noted for defying the usual body type portrayed in the magazine of more voluptuous women, with her smaller build placing more emphasis on her spiritual visions, which occurred in her photography shoots, such as in Playboy. By this time, however, Luna's modeling career began to decline due to a variety of factors. The first being a shift in her career from modeling into acting on her behalf. Secondly, a negative reception from mainstream popular media, which chastised her dependency on drugs like heroin, LSD, pot, and her eccentric behavior. A designer for whom Luna once worked said, "She took a lot of drugs and never paid her bills." Beverly Johnson in 1974 was asked about how her Vogue cover had been won by other Black women like Luna, said, "Luna doesn't wear shoes winter or summer. Ask her where she's from. Mars? She went up and down the runways on her hands and knees. She didn't show up for bookings. She didn't have a hard time. She made it hard for herself." Johnson later acknowledged in 2016 that Luna had made it possible for models like me and others, and that Luna is one of several Black models everyone needs to know, being one of those legends in our industry, one of the shoulders I stood on. In June 1975, she attended a Zandra Rhodes show at the Circle in the Square in New York, where she was seen posing in a veiled harem outfit. Now they're talking about her walk. It's titled Luna's Walk. While Luna did have a regular walk for the catwalk defined as a free-form hip-hop and strut, she was also known among the high fashion circles for her unconventional walking styles, still used by models like Pat Cleveland. Luna was known for her eccentricity since childhood, which derived from her time at acting, doing local and experimental theater in Detroit. She was often drawn to radical creatives, avant-garde goddesses such as Dali and Warhol, and she extended these influences to her modeling career. In method she developed based on method acting, known as internet lore as method modeling, she developed her own theatrical style of catwalks, such as crawling like a lion, grooving to the music, or suddenly freezing and making direct contact with journalists, eye contact that is, walking like a robot, stopping abruptly midway through a promenade, crawling on all fours like a stalking animal, sometimes slither like a snake, or simply having laid down and rolled from one end of the runway to the other. Oh yeah, that's kind of some crazy stuff. Can you imagine looking at something on one of the runways for Victoria's Secret and somebody's just rolling down the damn one runway like a log? I mean, I'd start laughing. That is kind of interesting. Anywho, method modeling employs techniques within one's individual consciousness, and technical skills and body movement are combined with camera awareness and artistic freedom, which allowed an audience to view the model's body of work as work of 3D or visual art, like considering how a sculptor considers dimensions in sculpting the human form, or using more vivid body language to express a wider function related to a theme to sell a product. Luna's method modeling background was more rooted in the theater technique and as such was a derivative of performance art. Bill Cunningham described watching the experience as how her body moves like a panther, her arms the wings of an exotic bird, the long neck suggests a black trumpet swan. The audience responds with shattering applause for the model's performance rather than the designer's clothes. It is the birth of a new fashion era, that of the spectacular show that rivals any on Broadway. The coterie of international designers for whom she often modeled, such as Andre Courrèges, Yves Saint Laurent, Rudy Gerin, I guess that's Jernerite, Mary Quant, Paco Rabanne, encouraged such displays, equating them to their own exuberant designs and to the rebelliousness, conduct of their youthful clientele. So basically, she was kind of like breaking the old norms of where you just walk up and down the walkway. I get it. Totally get it. Work, girl. You better work. That's where probably it all started from. Donyale Luna, y'all. Girl, you better work. And apparently, based on what I'm reading, she sure did. So now we're going to jump to the acting career, okay? Luna had initially planned to work in theater, having done work in local theater in Detroit after school hours and doing bit parts in Detroit's repertory theaters. When she joined theater camp in 1964, she was remembered by her acting tutor David Rambeau as warm and naive, he recalled. I never planned to be a model when I was in Detroit, she told a reporter in 1966. I wanted to be a starving actress in New York. She soon also began moving in circles associated with experimental theater like the Living Theater. On British TV, she appeared on Late Show London on March 14th and the Emo Andrews Show on May 1st, 1966. On December 12th, 1966, she appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Wow. Luna appeared in several films produced by Andy Warhol, including his series of shorts, Screen Tests, in 1965. Among the stars Warhol engaged for these short films, each roughly 4 minutes, Luna is notable as one of 4 African Americans in the series. Critic Wayne Kostenbaum described Luna in The Screen Test as pure diva, presenting a delicious mobile excess of mannerism. Luna also appeared in the feature-length Camp in 1965, Warhol's satire of his own world, where she dances to the Ramsey Lewis Trio instrumental The In Crowd, wearing a backless dress and fur stole. She is the eponymous star of Warhol's Donyale Luna, 1967, in a 33-minute color film in which she plays Snow White wearing blue contacts. In 1966, upon having moved to London, she appeared in Michelangelo Antonius' Blow Up, 1966, a satire of fashion photography. Luna also appeared in the Rolling Stones' Rock and Roll Circus, 1968, as the assistant of the circus performers' Fire Eater Act. In the French film Who Are You, Polly Maggoo, 1966, she played a model dressed in conical and almost unwearable abstract silver dress constructions shot by William Klein. Luna's only mainstream Hollywood film was the 1968 Otto Preminger comedy Skidoo, in which she was featured as the mistress of crime boss God, who was portrayed by Groucho Marx. Preminger also signed her with MGM for 3 years after she secured the role at a party for Twiggy. By this period, she had sold her apartments in London and Paris to live full-time in Italy and focus on acting. In 1969, she appeared as a background character in a television set in the film Dillinger is Dead. In the 1969 Federico Fellini film Fellini Satyricon, an Italian film portraying the fall of ancient Rome, she portrayed the witch Onothea, who, according to one commentator, in a trade-off with a wizard long ago, ended up with fire between her legs. And it's real fire, too, because Fellini shows us a scene in which a long line of foolish-looking peasants wait over with unlit torches at Onothea's bed. When their time comes, each devoutly places his torch between her legs to her sex, and poof! She then appeared in the 1970 Happening documentary film Soft Self-Portrait of Salvador Dali, a biography narrated by Orson Welles for French TV. Luna's last acting role was the title character of the 1972 Italian film Salome, directed by Carmelo Bene. In May 1973, at the Cannes Film Festival, considering herself as an international star, she pitched her life story to European and American film production company executives like Berry Gordy, who was at Cannes supporting Diana Ross and promoting her new film, Lady Sings the Blues. Interest was sparked in relation to the Battle of Versailles fashion show, but the pitch was never taken any further. In an interview for the Italian publication Panorama, Luna claimed that Gordy based the 1975 film Mahogany on this pitch. Ooh, I'm going to have to look at that movie again. That's basically about her. Interesting. So the only thing they say about her death was, during the early morning hours of May 17, 1979, Donyale Luna died from a heroin overdose in a clinic in Rome at age 33. Luna was survived by her husband, Luigi Cazzaniga, and her 18-month-old daughter, Dream. So now we dive into artistry. They have her like as a whole icon in herself. So Luna was known to be a muse of Salvador Dali and acted in many of the ways Dali did in accord with the philosophy of surrealism. The American photographer William Claxton introduced Luna to Dali when he met her in the Catalonian village of Cadaqués, becoming Dali's lifelong muse, whom he would refer to as the reincarnation of Nefertiti. Artworks show how she would stand on a half-submerged piano, which Dali has submerged herself for her to stand on, Claxton shooting, Dali drawing impromptu traceries on Luna's body, a line art piece on a cream dress, Willis she wore it, or emerging from a human-sized egg full of red paint, which made into a 1-hour-long surrealist film being a scriptless series of happenings all centered around images of birth and creativity in plastic costumes designed by Paco Rabanne. She could be found lying on a bed of fresh fish in Dali's home. She was also known to carry around a $1 million check, according to the supermodel Pat Cleveland, a legitimate check from her model agency, which she never took out and would try to pay for with a single meal, or her entourage of boys who followed her everywhere behind her in file. Because she never sat in chairs, she'd always lounge, while her entourage would lay at her feet, and with her penchant for going barefoot everywhere, Luna became known as an eccentric. The eccentric character of Donyale Luna can be seen both as a hyperbolic alter ego and the extension of a fake-it-till-you-make-it persona, which Luna may have thought of as a metamorphosis. Luna used camp to give off a larger-than-life character, using hair pieces, lengthened eyelashes, and a collection of blue, green, yellow, purple, orange-colored contacts, which she changed like underwear to play fast and loose with defined boundaries she may have had as Peggy Ann. She would both employ others and use her own designs for her clothes, experimenting with bindis on her third eye and often wearing loose-fitting or flowing garments. These two, Peggy Ann and Donyale, were succinctly distinct, however, to Freeman. So this is kind of like Beyonce and her alter ego, and that's basically what it is with Mariah and whatever her alter ego's name is. I'm bad with names with it. I'm this, I'm that. Sasha Fierce, that's Beyonce. So that's basically what Donyale is doing. So basically she stated of viewing Donyale in photographs, if I had seen something like me in a magazine as a child, I would have died laughing or been scared. I find my own photographs weird, terribly sophisticated, and different. The alter ego, see, there we go, Donyale Luna, was created in what Freeman termed future visiting in a new age approach, culminating when she attended Central High Theater in Detroit, a technique drawing from pantomime and experimental dancing and acting, which allowed the individual to create an altogether new identity by drawing on traits seen in visions from a desired individual like Baker to form a new identity. Luna would alter her attire, appearance, social circles, mannerisms, and paralinguistic features, like altering the pitch of her voice, for instance, to create the character of Donyale, crafting subtle bodily perceptions to alter or shift the viewer's perception of her as a Black body, to increase her pragmatical social prestige or standing. Exemplified in an advert for a polyester peasant blouse in 1966 for Ebony magazine, the iconography work was said to evoke the black and white images of Man Ray, acknowledging the shift of the early 20th century visual modernism morphed into the disjuncted body and read, and it says, see Mikhail Bakhtin's Theory of the Grotesque, and read Negro and Anthology, 1934 by Nancy Cunard, Henry D. Ford, page 417. The cool thing about why I use Wikipedia too, sidestepping for a moment, is because they have everything that's already cited in their sources, which is why I just use the Wikipedia link itself, because all their cited sources are in here. They just have the little footnotes. So we're going to speed right back into this, my darlings. So to move away from the classical Western notion of what a body should to be of distorted corporeal forms originating in African arts, expressionism, and cubism, and the body language of Josephine Baker, which Luna emulates. Interesting, huh? Just talking about her in the beginning, in the advertisement to create a more dynamic image of herself and African-American visual imagery. As a content creator, Luna's referencing of Baker and Nefertiti within the European context signaled her identification with them as Black women, heroines, and tropes, which Luna used as a model to emulate what Black success could be presented as an environmental which responds to both figures by primitivizing, sexualizing, and ultimately dehumanizing them in exotic or erotic roles that did not provide occupational transitions to more fulfilling post-spectacle lives. So basically it's just saying, she was using all the stereotypes to be sexy and all that, and she kind of like balanced between the two, because she could be a little bit of class, she could be a little bit of sass type of thing. Like business in the streets, hood in the sheets, that type of dichotomy. That's basically what that's about. Brown notes on how in the early 20th century, the expression of primitive glamour by self-consciously urban sophisticates such as Baker could equally be produced as a reimagining of subject-object relations, a paradoxical critique and deployment of pleasures, despite the motion, vitality, energy, and erotic vision imagined to be at the heart of the primitive. Primitive glamour allowed for self-assertion, so that the primitive role offered something more than crippled self-expression. Primitive glamour relied on the use of personae, impersonation, or a kind of eclipse of the human subject, which, although perilous, also offered substantial creative results. So rather than silencing artists with the gag of stereotype or the limitations of the market, primitive glamour often enabled the merging of the subject and object, questioning perceptions of who and what it was to be primitive, creating the formation of early Black glamour aesthetics in the 1920s, Europe, much as primitivism aesthetics. For instance, in her primitive shoot with Harper's Bazaar, dressed in an animal print in 1965, Luna constructs and performs an oppositional Black glamour by using the provided cloths and tangible things to interpolate her audience in specific ways, combining narrative with history and materiality to structure specific gestures and movements, and working with her own effective engagement with the material as dances with things, undoing the work of glamour as a white racial project, thus creating an aspirational lifestyle for potential Black audiences. And with her gesticular poses in print magazines emphasized her angular frame, while her assertive body language, including a powerful stare called The Look by fashion magazines and later described as ocular assault because her signature pose used to entrance her audience, Freeman used Donyale to create the altogether new image of aesthetic of what constituted Black glamour, a new beauty paradigm for African-American visual imagery and Black subject agency, developed from Baker's era of primitive glamour into previously white spaces. So basically what it's saying is she just played up the exotic form of what it was to be Black. And so whenever you see people pose all goofy and crazy, you think of her for that. And those models who kind of give you that glare in those photos and you see on the spreads and on magazine covers, that comes from her too, based on what I just said. Now, she was believed to have met the artist Mattie Clarwine, who made psychedelic album covers for artists like Jimi Hendrix, through Sam Rivers at an occupational gathering for Miles Davis in New York in 1964, where her likeness appears in this painting time in a circle of gold leaf surrounded by Schmidt Mars representing the earth and sky. In the circle sits a polymorphous figure, an aggregate of fire, water, multiple faces of beautiful women, female breasts, male genitalia, rainbow patterns, animal heads, skulls derived from Tibetan and Hindu religious imagery, topped off by Donyale Luna's trimorphic head. So basically those hippy-dippy psychedelic type of like posters you see with all these things going on in it, that's what that was basically about. plus also being portrayed in 1967 as a self-portrait. Clarwine dedicated Milk and Honey in 1973, his book of reproduced paintings. So he basically did that book for her. In Europe, she was also part of the rock music scene, having been featured in the Italian music video for Patti Bravo's song Michelle in 1969. Dang, there were music videos back in 1969. Well, that's a new one I just learned. In her 1975 Playboy interview, she held the belief that beauty was something not physical, but something beyond that. She also noted that children were more readily accepting of her form of beauty. She reported to the Argentinian press in 1969, beauty is something else, something inexplicable that each person carries inside. This form of beauty related to her visions. There's a great division coming about on this planet. There are going to be a lot of people who will die because they just don't know how to live. They don't know what life's about. They don't know how to give, how to love, nor do they want to. And those who are beautiful enough, I don't mean physically, but something beyond that, they will have the chance to learn how to fly, to be beautiful, to rise above the level of the normal human, to be superior beings first and eventually gods and goddesses. Why does that sound like something out the Matrix, like with Neo and all that? Like the beautiful people, because they did know how to fly and rise above the level of normal human in all the Matrix series, right? Anyway, she anticipated a spiritual Armageddon she called the Great Division due to her perception that other people's lack of understanding between themselves would lead to this great divide based on superficial issues like physical beauty in the future in which she foresaw. Well, that's kind of true. We do have a lot of division in this country. That's pretty darn true. So now here's where we get the racial stuff. This is where we talk about the mixed race and in her lineage. So Donyale Luna identified as multiracial. Throughout her life and career, Luna claimed to be of various mixed ethnic backgrounds, often playing down her African-American ancestry since being a teenager in Detroit. Later on in life, she insisted that her biological father was a man with the surname Luna and that her mother was an indigenous Mexican and of Afro-Egyptian lineage. According to Luna, one of her grandmothers was reportedly a former Irish actress who married a black interior decorator. However, the historical accuracy of this is questionable. She would also claim to be of Polynesian descent in high school. She often made up tall tales to make her seem more grandiose, part of the character of Donyale Luna she began in her teenage years, including beguiling stories designed to shock or amuse, such as losing her parents in a car accident and being adopted, or replying to the question of her heritage with the line, "I'm from the moon, darling," which some have construed to mean she denied her heritage as a black woman. While her penchant for wearing blue contact lenses was seen by some as race betrayal, it was probably part of a process of reinvention that had begun in her teenage years, in fact, constructing a new identity as Donyale Luna. Dream Kazaniga, on her mother leaving Detroit for New York, writes of the likelihood, that's her daughter, y'all remember Dream was like 18 months when she died, writes of the likelihood of employment as a model, how there were virtually no modeling opportunities for non-white faces anywhere other than dedicated African-American publications such as Ebony. Finding it amazing how Luna was to leave home for Manhattan at that point in history with no clear plans or steady income, just a telephone number hastily written down by a stranger. The only other industries which used models of color included the soft drinks industry such as Coca-Cola in 1957 or the tobacco industry. Due to the prejudices of a white-dominated industry where white was the default and black the other, with racist language, dress, and behavior used towards her in work and everyday life in New York, she moved from North America to Europe, where she likely found an audience more accepting of her skin color, describing herself as multi-ethnic. Europe at the time was seen as more accepting of white-passing black models, such as Ophelia DeVore, who had modeled herself and had her own agency's models working in Paris, or Dorothea Church in the 1950s, and mistakenly African-American models like Dolores Francine Riney, who was the first black model to walk on the European catwalk. Darker models such as Helen Williams later became accepted in the 1960s. In the Sunday Times Magazine in 1966, Harold Carlton hailed her as the new image of the Negro woman. Fashion finds itself in an instrumental position for changing history, however slightly, for it is about to bring out into the open the veneration, the adoration, the idealization, the adulation of the Negro. As for the United States, until the advent of the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s, the fashion industry operated its own kind of apartheid, which entirely excluded non-white models from its magazines, advertising, and catwalk shows. Luna could work alongside models like Jean Shrimpton and Verushka and command the same salary, but was thought of as exotic, becoming a victim of othering. First by white, then later the Black community, compounded as both the girl next door and exotic Negro model type. With the advent of the Civil Rights Movement in the United States, so too did society's fascination with the exotic and alien. Almost against her own will, she became a symbol. Some people declared her a Maasai warrior, Galguiness, Nefertiti reborn. Others claimed she was another species entirely, or from outer space. Time in 1966 called her a creature of contrast, 1 minute sophisticated, the next fawn-like, now exotic and far away. Racialist language such as being from outer space was routinely used and was adopted by Luna in her Donyale character in a bid to overcome the boundaries this language created toward her as a Black body in the American public eye, and evolved over time to accommodate this prejudiced language. So basically, she took the power back. She took the negative stuff and took it back. She said in late 1966 to a reporter that fashion photographers saw me as something different, but I'm certain it has nothing to do with my color. I never think of myself as a brown girl. Due to the color barrier by then, the prestige of her modeling jobs had now shifted from photo editorial work for Harper's Bazaar to the secondary advertising market in Ebony magazine. The so-called secondary market, however, was worth an estimated $15 billion, and white advertisers who began working in the market preferred Luna's otherworldly features, her long limbs, oval-shaped face, and almond eyes, not being traditionally readily associated with Black women, as they alienated other African Americans and provided white advertisers with the manufactured sense of racial superiority, in which may be considered as tokenism on the behalf of advertising agencies involved. Jane Hoffman described the evolution of the acceptable Negro from white passing models, first used in 1950s advertisements in magazines like Jet, to the 1960s replacement, the exotic Negro, who was the Negro girl you think of as something else. She wasn't even beautiful, just a weird creature, like some kind of space thing. She had to be so bizarre that no Black person could identify with them. This typecasting of Black models limited Hoffman's own choices because she was not Negro enough to be Black under the respectability politics of white industry standards for Black models at that time. White American society preferred exotic Luna over women like Hoffman, as they provided an existing false narrative which fueled their pre-existing media biases about Blackness and its otherness, reinforced existing stereotypes, and excluded Black women, and narrowed the definition of what Black beauty could take the appearance of how an acceptable Negro would appear, in opposition to whites who would be seen as the default of acceptability and whose appearance would not be called into question so easily. So basically just comparing her to European standards type of thing. European standards being the norm, Black being not the norm. Indeed, they infantilized Black women who could be sexy, sinuous, glamorous, marvelous entertainers. But when it came to fashion, magazines, and advertising, they simply do not exist. They were not considered to have the necessary spending power that publishers and agencies wanted to exploit. All fashionable images of Black women were made through the primitive lens, which Baker herself used so successfully to create a new beauty standard in the 1920s France. Until when in 1965, Luna broke the color barrier as a model and created new media content, which showed an African-American woman for the first time in high fashion magazines within visible beauty standards. Prior to this, an African-American woman wearing scant clothing was stuff of the white man's sexual fantasies. And until Luna, the kind of image a Black girl could strive for. That, or to never fall back on imitating whatever the current white style of beauty happened to be, as the standard begins with Black beauty from the beginning. For years, Black girls had literally been through torture in their efforts to achieve the full creative range of hairstyles, using dangerous hot combs or chemical solutions like sodium hydroxide or lye, which could burn their hair away, or styles of wigs that Black women wore in order to enhance their beauty in a myriad of ways beyond any limitations of text, tradition, or culture. The same thing applied to cosmetics. The Supremes, then being a perfect example of how Black girls built their glamour around their own ideals, stemming from their own natural, rich, and glorious beauty. And so theirs was the look longed for by Blacks from Brixton to Harlem. There was simply no one else you could try to imitate. Brixton is like the Black area of London. I've been to Brixton. That's where Eddie Grant sings Electric Avenue. There actually is an Electric Avenue in Brixton, and he's singing about being and growing up in Brixton, which is the Black ghetto spot of London. But I thought it looked great. Anywho. So, next thing. So, as a factor of race, she further stated, most of my publicity has been because I'm dark-skinned, but I think the reaction would have been the same if I were white because of my body features, referring to her uncommon height and bodily proportions, which these companies regarded as exotic. Although claims are often made that comments like this is a sign that Luna was attempting to shift away from her African-American heritage, she would go on to carry out a public anti-racial discrimination campaign alongside David Anthony of the Touchables fame, with clothing designed by Mary Quant being shot by David Bailey. When she was denied service in 1968 in a Mayfair hotel, she also filed a formal complaint for racial discrimination with the Board of Racial Discrimination. The American print journalist Junie Stone wrote a now infamous profile of Luna for the New York Times in 1968, describing Luna using racialist language such as secretive, mysterious, contradictory, evasive, mercurial, and insistent upon her own multiracial lineage, exotic chameleon strands of indigenous Mexican, Indonesian, Irish, and last but not least escapable African. Luna responded that the civil rights movement has my greatest support, but I don't want to get involved racially. Dazed reporter Philippa Burton noticed how today makes for uncomfortable reading. The interview is obsessive probing of her multiracial lineage, jarring with Luna's obvious displeasure of talking about it. When Stone asked her about whether her appearances in Hollywood films would benefit the causes of Black actresses, Luna replied, "If it brings me about more jobs for Mexicans, Asians, Native Americans, Africans, groovy. It could be good or it could be bad. I couldn't care less," which are indicative of the limited and pure quality of jobs and opportunities available to Luna at the time in an environment which seemingly only accepted models who passed the brown paper bag test. Comments such as those have meant that she had been widely forgotten in favor of Beverly Johnson. Remember, they do say Beverly Johnson was the first Black supermodel, while revealing the complex dynamics that she refused to be defined by, being typecast in the roles such as Diana Ross in the film Mahogany, a media portrayal that may have been a cause for conflict in her identity as a Black woman and someone in the public eye, such as when the protagonist of Mahogany is referred to as an inanimate object, and the misogyny of the modeling industry in the film, in which a Black body altered how Luna was to be remembered and perceived in the short and long term, placing more value on her as a body, valuing looks and the profit involved from her modeling, than Freeman as a person, thus disregarding her full worth and objectifying Luna. After her death, Luna's widower, Italian photographer Luigi Casaniga, said that Luna identified as a mulatta and that she felt rejected by the Black community and the white one. Her daughter notes people longed for her to become a symbol of the African-American resistance, a role she struggled with as someone who identified as mixed race. Penultimately, in regards to the racism she faced in the U.S., Luna believed that questions surrounding her Blackness and how she fit into American society, being a quarter Black, were America's problem, often attempting to escape labels major publications placed on her, replying to the Times, "Yeah, I'm an American on Black and white, but I'm me, in an attempt to reject American notions of race and to establish herself as a more fully rounded human being. By 1974, having not found full acceptance in Europe either, she was caught between the insinuating effects of racial cultural renunciation and sexual stereotype. Luna's response was to wear the mask of one of Giacometti's skeletal sculptures and to become a negligible component of life, hovering between existence and nothingness in Italy and in the public eye. From this time on, she had problems figuring out who she was as a Black woman, eventually becoming a soul on ice, an entity encased and obscured by its own false image, which only hinted at the naked power and creative potential that lay beneath the surface, or a shell of the former aspirations she held in her identity in youth. From a heady time when Luna had skipped modeling's apprenticeship, stag of endless castings and rejections from racist fashion magazines, and come out straight in at the top, having made the cover of a top fashion magazine, worn the world's most expensive dresses, and commanded a day rate of up to $100 an hour, all by the age of 19. So now we're talking about the romantic relationship. See, this woman lived a full life, y'all. So, in the mid-1960s, Luna was married to an anonymous German actor for 10 months. Later, she reportedly was engaged to the Austrian-born Swiss actor Maximilian Schnell, then to an unnamed Danish photographer, and George Willing, a German actor who appeared in the European horror films such as 1970's Necropolis and With the Living Theater. She would frequently stop short of making any lasting commitment to her suitors, though this may have had this history as her history with men was checked. Model Geraldine Smith recalled that in 1967, Donyale had this crazy boyfriend who came in last night and smashed her over the head with a beer bottle, for instance. In 1968, Luna was purportedly dating the Australian pop artist Martin Sharp. Around 1969, Luna was also romantically involved with German actor Klaus Kinski. However, the relationship ended when Kinski asked her entourage to leave his house in Rome, concerned that their drug use could damage his career. She would later move to Italy and continue her acting career there. By September 1969, she had met her next partner, Luigi Cazzaniga, at a fashion show in Rome. However, she was then rumored by the Italian press to be dating the Dominican actor Juan Fernandez, whom she met around 1969, and is thought to have been dating in 1972 when filming Salome. Luna later married Italian photographer Luigi Cazzaniga after having met him at a party in Italy. For the first 2 months of their relationship, they could not speak to each other, as Cazzaniga only knew how to speak Italian, he noted. He liked her for her love of creativity and for everything that wasn't square. They eventually married in California in 1976, and in 1977, they had a daughter, Dream Cazzaniga. Dream's name was inspired by Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous I Have a Dream speech. The couple eventually separated and, while still legally married, were estranged at the time of Luna's death of heroin overdose. And religion. Luna converted to Catholicism as an adolescent from her family's Presbyterian roots. That's it about religion. Now, legacy. Since her death, Donyale's Luna 1966 Vogue cover has been hailed as an opening doors for Black models and normalizing the inclusion of African-American and Afro-Europeans on magazines previously catering to majority white demographics. Pat Cleveland noted Luna as her own inspiration who, along with Naomi Sims, opened doors for other women of color in the 1960s, thus leading to more appearances for women such as Sims' 1967 New York Times fashion supplement cover and Beverly Johnson's American Vogue 1974 cover, for example. This continued with British Vogue using Black models Gail O'Neill in March 1986, Naomi Campbell 5 times between December 1987 to August 2002, and Jordan Dunn in November 2015 as solo cover models under Anna Wintour, Elizabeth Tilberis, Alexander Schulman's tenures. Luna's reputation as one who often rejected typecast labeling has led the promulgation of erasure of her achievements in the fashion industry. Philippa Burton wrote in 2009 how clean-cut models like Beverly Johnson and Iman, whose lives were not to end murkily through an overzealous use of heroin, were louder and prouder ambassadors of the Black is Beautiful message. Their more palatable versions of Black womanhood loom large in the public consciousness today. Eccentric Luna, on the other hand, who is eternally cagey about her racial identity, waxed lyrical about LSD in interviews, and had an endearing habit of not wearing shoes, has, for the most part, been forgotten. Depressingly, the biggest triumph of Luna's career, her groundbreaking Vogue cover of 1966, represents a war that is very much still being waged. Sarah Dukas, founder of Storm Model Agency, grimly admits that a Black model gracing the cover of a mainstream publication is still unusual, and it has been noted she may have been part of the tokenism of advertising agencies to lure Black consumers. This being consistent with the fact that over time, the loss of African American history has prompted the creation of first lists. Her career has thus been described as a meteoric ascent to fame and free fall into anonymity, which frequently morphs into bodily speculation and social isolation. However, the designer, Steve Burrows, also noted, Luna was ahead of the black model thing. There weren't too many in the U.S. in the 1960s where commenting on Luna's extravagant outlook and attitude towards her own career opportunities, due in part to the timing of the Black is Beautiful movement only gaining traction toward the end of Luna's career, as black models didn't truly enjoy their coming out until the 70s, and her New Age beliefs, models such as Beverly Johnson now feature more prominently on black first lists, even though Luna's cover in 1966 predates Johnson's by 8 years. Luna is usually today therefore regarded as a key player in the mid to late 1960s fashion, film, and experimental theater scenes, who, by the 1970s, was unable to move beyond the external and self-imposed limitations for someone of her idiosyncratic, temperamental, and tenuous lifestyle, which united to diminish and obscure her once impressive figure, which then led to her public erasure. Thus, Luna leaves behind a mixed legacy as a model who both broke the color barrier and as an underground actress, best remembered for her 1966 Vogue cover. In her role as the first black model for the cover of a major print magazine, Luna has had a renewed interest in her modeling career in social media, fashion bloggers, and among black business owners. With the promotion of editors at British Vogue, such as Edward Enningful in 2017, British Vogue covers starring black models have increased. She has also appeared in the 2008 all-black Vogue issue and was recognized by Naomi Campbell in her CFDA acceptance speech in 2019. And Nan Golden dedicated the exhibit Sirens for her. She was also the inspiration for Pat McGrath for her 6th edition of her Mothership makeup palette. The Afro-Brazilian TV personality Thelma Assis has also recreated the twin photo shoot on the July 2020 cover of Harper's Bazaar Brazil. In November 2020, actress Zendaya appeared in a photo shoot inspired by Luna for the 50th anniversary of Essence. The HBO Max documentary Donyale Luna Supermodel was released in September 2023, co-produced by her daughter Dream Kazaniga. So you know what, y'all? I'm going to go see, because I have Hulu with HBO Max. I'm going to find that. So basically, Donyale Luna Supermodel. Okay, I'm going to look into that. So my darlings, that pretty much is all about this amazing, interesting, unique woman who was very much ahead of her time, even in terms of, being kind of, frazzled about being poked at by her mixed race ancestry and everything. I mean, that's why she's forgotten. She was too ahead of her time. Maybe if she had came out maybe in the 90s or maybe in the 2000s or something, we probably would know more about like how much her influence is. But she was born and died when she had to, in the scheme of things, to kind of establish the foundation of how modeling is today for women of color. I mean, it's still not at its peak, but at least she laid a part of that foundation in her own unique way, and she needs to be recognized for that. So I applaud her. I try, kudos to you, honey. I don't care what anybody else says, and I'm glad I found this information, because like my late mother always said, you learn something new every day. So, honey, I want to thank you all, my darlings, for joining me today on a model I'd never heard of till about 2 weeks ago. And I want to know, what are your thoughts on biracial and mixed race people of color being referred to as only by one of their backgrounds as the first? Sometimes I kind of feel like I'm on the fence about that one. But any Hooters loves, I want you to please download, share, and spread the word to your friends about GMP Generation Mix Podcast. I'm on all platforms, Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, iHeart, and you can also follow on IG at Generation Mix Podcast. And if you want to be on the show or have any ideas, please, my darling, send an email to generationmixpodcast@gmail.com. I want y'all to have a great day, a lovely week, and a fantastic weekend. See you soon. Mwah.